Oi gente, tudo bem? Welcome back to another one of my videos. I hope these are better than before. I'm slowly getting the hang of picking topics and in a way people can understand who are just learning English now. So I wanted to take a break from linguistics and talk about topics in linguistics. Now the difference is in linguistics, we solely focus on phonology and phonetics and semantics and morphology, things like that. Now we're going to talk about applied linguistics. That is what happens with languages and people, like social linguistics. So first, I want to talk about what it takes to learn a language well. Now this isn't a step-by-step guide. This isn't going to tell you how to learn a language well, but what does it take? What goes into learning a language well? In the US, many students learn Spanish, and normally people take 2 years of Spanish, maybe 3 years, maybe even 4 years of Spanish. And after I hear this a lot. They say, oh man, I learned Spanish for 3 years and I can't speak anything. I don't even know Spanish. Well, half of that is because they didn't care to learn, and we have to learn a language. Some other people say this. They say, oh yeah, I learned Spanish for 3 years and I knew it okay, but man, I forgot it all already. And that's because they weren't in contact with Spanish. They didn't speak to anyone. They didn't watch anything in Spanish. They didn't stay in contact with the language. So you can learn how to read really well in a language, and you can learn how to listen pretty well in a language. But talking to someone can be the most difficult. It might even feel like you don't know a language at all. And it's possible you might not. For example, when I took Portuguese, by the end of my classes, I was like, oh, I know Portuguese so well. I can read it, I can write it. Oh man, I'm awesome. But then I heard someone speak Portuguese, and I was like, I I don't know what you just said. I really don't. Everything I learned just out the window. And out the window just means everything is gone. And what had happened was I learned Portuguese academically. I didn't learn informal Portuguese. I didn't learn how people actually spoke the language. There's usually two ways people learn a language. They learn it through immersion, which means they're placed in that language. They are like forced to move to another country and they only can speak that language, or they learn it in a classroom. Now, both ways have pros and cons, good and bad things. Learning a language through immersion will teach you fluency. It'll teach you how people use the language and culturally how they speak. But what you don't learn is what the language is doing. With immersion, you might know oo and ah is the, feminine and masculine. But you might not even know that. You might say, oh, they just use oo for this word, or they use for that word. I don't know why, but it is. So when you're learning language academically in a classroom, you learn all of that, and it helps. But when you go onto the streets, it doesn't help. You basically start the language from the beginning. You're like, okay, can you speak slowly because I can't understand you? And then your listening improves, and you're like, oh, okay. And then you recognize sounds, and then you recognize sentences, and then you're thinking, oh, everything I learned, now I can use it. Now my listening is good. So both take you to a plateau. A plateau is just you're going up, and then you kind of feel like you're not doing anything. And then you need that immersion or that academic setting to be able to keep going. And for most of us, we find ourselves stuck in that academic setting. And it feels like we're never going to learn English until we speak to a native speaker. And that can be difficult, but don't give up because you should always continue to learn. So thank you for watching, and I hope that gave you some perspective on what goes into learning a language well. I'll see you next time.